He walked into the kitchen with his suitcase already packed. He didn't make eye contact. He didn't hesitate. He just stopped at the doorway, looked in her direction for half a second, and said the 6 words that would stay with her for the rest of her life. "You were never enough." Then he turned, opened the door, and left. She stood there, holding a damp dish towel in her hands, completely frozen. The coffee she made that morning was still hot on the table. The blue shirt, his favorite one, the one she had carefully laid out over the chair for him, was still untouched. But he was already gone. Not just from the house, but from the story they had built together. There hadn't been a fight that morning. No shouting, no accusations, no drama. Just silence. That quiet, heavy kind of silence that only people who've drifted too far apart know how to share. She'd woken up early, just like always, made his coffee, ironed his shirt, heated up the bathroom. She thought that if she just kept showing up, if she just loved him enough, things would eventually go back to how they were. But they didn't. Because love alone doesn't fix indifference. And she had been carrying that marriage on her back for so long, she didn't even realize she was walking alone. He didn't leave because of a fight. He left because he had already made up his mind. Maybe weeks ago, maybe months. The bags didn't pack themselves overnight. He had been planning it, rehearsing it in his head. And when he finally spoke, when he said those words, "You were never enough," it wasn't a moment of anger. It was a verdict. Cold, final, like a sentence carved in stone. She didn't cry immediately. She didn't scream. She didn't call anyone. She just slowly sat down on the kitchen floor, her back against the cabinets, her hands still clutching the towel, and stared at the space he had just walked through. I remember thinking, is that it? After everything? That's how it ends? She stayed there for hours. Her phone rang, messages came in, her mother called, her sister too, but she didn't pick up. She didn't want comfort, she didn't want words, she just wanted the silence, the same silence that had filled their home for months, to speak to her honestly for once. Because deep down she knew it had been coming. The way he stopped listening, the way he avoided her eyes at dinner, the way he brushed off every attempt she made to connect, the way he started answering with nods and sighs instead of words. Love doesn't die all at once, it starves. And by the time he spoke that sentence, their love had already gone hungry for too long. And yet, despite everything, a part of her still believed him. That's the cruelest part. When someone you've loved, someone you built a life with, looks at you and tells you that you were never enough, it gets inside you. It rewrites everything. She told me, I started questioning every memory, every time I thought we were happy. I asked myself, was I just delusional? She thought about the little things, the birthday he forgot, the anniversary dinner he skipped for a work meeting, the way he never once said thank you when she stayed up late helping him with his projects. She started to wonder if maybe she had been the problem all along. But what she didn't know, what no one knew, was that he hadn't walked out empty-handed, and he hadn't left her empty-handed either. Hidden at the bottom of the drawer of his bedside table, under some old receipts and a broken watch, there was a letter addressed to her. And what he wrote inside that letter would shatter everything he said at the door and completely change the way she saw the end of their story. She found the letter 5 days after he left. It wasn't hidden on purpose. It was just left behind. Folded once, slightly yellowed at the edges, tucked at the very back of his bedside drawer, beneath old receipts, a spare house key, and a watch wrist that had long since stopped ticking. She almost missed it, but when she picked it up, and saw her name written in his handwriting. Steady, deliberate. Something in her chest tightened. She told me her hands were trembling before she even unfolded it. And this is what it said. If you're reading this, it means I didn't have the courage to say what I needed to say face to face, and I'm sorry for that. You weren't the reason I left. The truth is, I haven't recognized myself in a long time. I've been living in a fog. Not because of you, but because I lost touch with the man I thought I was going to become. Somewhere along the way, I let go of my own life without realizing it. You gave everything, more than I deserved. You carried the weight of two people when I stopped showing up. You kept trying, kept loving, kept hoping, and I kept drifting farther away. Not because of you, because I was ashamed, because every time you looked at me with kindness, I felt smaller. Every time you believed in us, I hated myself for not being able to feel the same. You were more than enough. You were the only light in a house I let grow dark, and I couldn't admit it. Not to you, not to myself. So I made you doubt yourself. I let you think you weren't doing enough, that you weren't enough. But that wasn't true. I just didn't know how to be loved without feeling like a fraud. You deserved honesty, but I gave you distance. You deserved closure, but I left you with confusion. I don't know if you'll ever forgive me. I'm not sure I deserve it, but I hope one day you'll know it was never about you not being enough. It was about me not being ready to be held by someone so real. She sat on the edge of the bed and read it 3 times. Each time, she cried a little differently. The first time with anger, because how dare he let her carry that guilt for days, maybe forever, while he walked away knowing the truth. The second time with grief, because she realized she had loved someone who never truly let her in, and who only told the truth once he was gone. And the third time with something close to peace, because finally, after everything, she had clarity, and clarity has a strange kind of mercy. She told me she didn't know whether to keep the letter or burn it. Part of her wanted to forget the pain. The other part wanted to frame those words, not because they healed everything, but because they proved she hadn't imagined it, that her love had been real, that her effort hadn't been invisible. She didn't call him. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. What she needed, she already had. The truth. Not the version he said at the door, but the one he finally admitted on paper, too late to take back, but soon enough to free her. And that's what changed everything.
Hopeful but still delicate. There's a shift here, the beginning of emotional recovery. The narrator should reflect a calm strength emerging. She didn't tell anyone about the letter at first. Not her mother, not her sister, not even her closest friend. For a few days, it was just hers, a private truth sitting inside the drawer where she had placed it again, neatly folded, like it hadn't just undone everything he said on his way out the door. But something shifted after that. It wasn't loud or dramatic. There was no scene, no declaration of empowerment, just quiet changes. Small choices that started to rebuild her sense of self from the inside out. She began with the little things, changing the sheets, throwing out the mugs he used, rearranging the bookshelves. It might not sound like much, but for someone who had spent years tiptoeing around another person's preferences, those choices were a revolution. She repainted the guest room. She opened the windows. She let the house breathe again. And with it, she started breathing differently too. She started waking up without the weight on her chest. Some mornings, she still remembered his words, "You were never enough." But they didn't sting the same way anymore. Because now when those words echoed, they collided with the truth he had written. And that letter, flawed, late, and imperfect as it was, reminded her that the lie wasn't hers to carry. She began saying no more often. Not in anger, just with clarity. No to favors she didn't want to do. No to conversations that drained her. No to being the one who always had to reach out, check in, show up. And slowly, people noticed how she held herself differently, how she laughed without checking the room first, how she no longer apologized for being quiet or tired or unavailable. Something in her had come back, or maybe something new had arrived. She didn't become someone else, she just stopped shrinking. A few months later, she ran into a friend of his, one of those mutual connections that neither of them had really kept up with. The friend asked her how she was doing. She smiled and said, "I'm doing better now." No bitterness, no explanation, just truth. Later that evening, she told me that moment mattered more than she expected. Because for the first time, I said it out loud. And it wasn't just something I was trying to believe. It was real. She never heard from him again. And she didn't need to. He had left, and then he had spoken the truth, too late to fix the relationship, but just in time to release her from the lies she had almost tattooed onto her soul. Some stories don't end with revenge or regret. Some end with someone finally remembering who they are and choosing themselves. That's what she did. No grand gestures, no dramatic transformations, just quiet power. The kind that comes when you stop waiting for someone to return what they were never able to give. She was always enough. And now she finally knew it. It wasn't a straight path after that. Healing never is. There were days when she felt like she had moved on, strong, clear, anchored. And then, out of nowhere, a song would play in a cafe, or she'd spot a car that looked like his passing by, and the ground would shift again. The ache would return, quiet but familiar, like a shadow that never completely disappears, only softens over time. But here's the thing. She stopped trying to outrun it. She learned to sit with it. She told me once, "I realized healing isn't about never hurting again. It's about no longer believing the hurt defines who I am." She started journaling. Every night, just a few lines. Not about him, not anymore, but about herself, her thoughts, her wants. Her voice, which for years had been buried under the weight of compromise. Page by page, she reclaimed it. And she began noticing the world again, noticing the way sunlight crept across the kitchen floor in the morning, how it painted golden shapes on the tiles, noticing how good it felt to walk alone, without rushing, without waiting for anyone, noticing how music sounded different when no one else was choosing the playlist. She wasn't looking to be saved anymore. One Sunday, she went back to the church near her neighborhood. Not for anyone, not because she was broken, but because she felt something stirring inside her that she couldn't name. Something that wanted space, something that wanted to rise. She sat quietly in the back, listened to the choir, and let the music wash over her. She didn't cry, she didn't pray for answers, she just breathed. And that was enough. That week,
She started cooking again. Not the meals he liked, but the ones she had stopped making because he didn't care for them. She danced around the kitchen with music playing, letting the spices speak for her. It was clumsy, beautiful, real. Some people noticed the change. Others didn't. But it didn't matter anymore. She wasn't performing healing. She was simply living. She began making small plans. A weekend trip, a pottery class. She signed up for a volunteer shift at a local shelter. And each new thing didn't erase what had happened, but it reminded her that life wasn't over just because someone walked out. One evening, while watching the sunset from her porch, she whispered out loud, "I forgive you." Not because he asked for it, not because he deserved it, but because she no longer wanted to carry the bitterness. Because forgiveness for her wasn't an absolution. It was a release. And after she said it, the silence around her felt different. Lighter. Some scars don't fade completely, but they stop hurting when touched. That's what was happening now. She had no desire to replace him, no need to prove anything. Her story wasn't about getting back at him or falling in love again. It was about reclaiming the life she had postponed, the joy she had rationed, the voice she had silenced in order to keep someone else comfortable. She told me, "I don't need a perfect ending. I just need to be able to say, I stayed true to myself, even after everything." And she had. That was her quiet victory. She never framed the letter. She never burned it either. It stayed tucked away in the same drawer where she had first found it, quietly resting under a stack of notebooks and old cards. Not as a wound, not as a keepsake, just a reminder of what she survived, of what she let go, and of what she chose to carry forward. Because by now, she understood. Not everything broken needs to be fixed. Some things are meant to stay shattered, so we can rebuild something stronger in their place. Her story didn't end with that letter. It began there. There was a shift in how she spoke about her past. She no longer whispered the painful parts. She didn't cover them with sarcasm or pretend they didn't leave marks. But she didn't let them own her voice anymore either. The story became a chapter, not the whole book. And people started noticing, not just in the way she smiled more, though she did. Not just in how she walked into a room, though now she didn't shrink when she did, but in something deeper, a steadiness, a peace that no longer needed to be explained. One afternoon, a friend asked her what had changed. She paused, looked out the window, and said, "I stopped asking why it happened. I started asking what it taught me." Because the truth was, for a long time, she prayed for things to go back to the way they were. She prayed for restoration, for reconciliation, for answers. But over time, her prayers changed. She no longer asked for what she had lost. She asked for the strength to love herself the way she once loved him, fiercely, unapologetically, without holding back. And somewhere in the middle of that surrender, something bigger stepped in. Call it grace, call it healing, call it God. But whatever it was, it didn't arrive with thunder or signs or miracles. It came quietly, like breath returning to lungs that had forgotten how to expand, like light through curtains you forgot to open, like a whisper that said, "You are already whole
She began trusting again, not in people, not right away, but in life. In the mornings that arrived whether or not she was ready, in the music that made her cry for no reason, in the laughter that returned without permission, in the strangers who smiled at her without knowing her story, in herself. And one day, months after the letter, she walked past a man who looked nothing like him and felt nothing. No ache, no memory, just peace. Because that's the thing about healing. It doesn't ask for permission. It just happens, slowly, quietly, until one day you realize you are no longer living in survival mode. You're living. That night, she lit a candle by her window and whispered a prayer. Not for someone else, not for the past, just for herself, for her own becoming, for everything ahead, for the parts of her that would still tremble, and the parts that had already learned how to stand. And then, with a small smile, she blew out the flame, because she no longer needed it to see the way forward.